The wind cut through the high towers of the Earl's estate like a silver blade, carrying with it the faint scent of wet stone and winter smoke. Lady Alara stood in the long hallway outside the Earl's private chambers, her hands pressed tightly together, trying to steady the tremor in her fingers. The Earl himself, Lord Draven, had summoned her earlier that morning with a voice colder than the frost on the windows. 1 hour to pack your things, he had said, his dark eyes sharp and unyielding. Your services are no longer required in this house. Alara had bowed, hiding the shock behind the practiced calm of a healer. She was accustomed to the rigid rules of noble households, where kindness often carried a price, and where one misstep could unravel years of careful reputation. Yet, even she could not anticipate the abruptness of this dismissal. Her heart had tightened at the thought of leaving the estate, where she had lived and worked for nearly 3 years. The rooms, the gardens, even the dusty corridors, had become a part of her life. And yet, she gathered herself, unwilling to show the Earl that his words had shaken her. As she began to move toward her small chamber to retrieve her few belongings, a faint sound froze her in place. A soft, stifled groan, like someone trying not to cry out. Her instincts flared. Healers were trained to notice the smallest signs of pain, and this one called to her more urgently than any polite summons ever had. She followed the sound, each step cautious, careful not to announce her curiosity to anyone who might be watching. The groans led her to a door partially hidden by heavy tapestries. Beyond it lay a dim corridor she had rarely used, where shadows pooled like spilled ink. At the end of the corridor, a faint figure stirred a child, lying on the cold stone floor. The boy's face was pale, his dark hair matted with blood and sweat, his small hand clutched at his side, and every shallow breath he took seemed a battle. Alara's breath caught. She recognized him immediately. Alistair, the Earl's only son. No one had spoken of an injury. No one had mentioned sickness. And yet, here he was, alone and suffering. The healer's heart ached with a mixture of fear and urgency. She knew that if anyone found her here, especially the Earl, she could be accused of meddling, or worse. But the sight of the boy's suffering left her no choice. Alistair, she whispered, kneeling beside him. I am here. I will help you. The boy's eyes fluttered open, wide with a mixture of pain and relief. I didn't want to trouble anyone, he stammered. His voice was small, hesitant, as though even speaking aloud might worsen his condition. You are never a trouble, Alara said softly, brushing his damp hair from his forehead. Her hands worked quickly, examining the wound. The boy had been hurt in some sort of accident or perhaps something more sinister. Bruises ran along his side, and a deep gash had begun to swell and darken. She could see the faint glow of a strange mark near the cut. Faint but unnatural, as if the shadow itself had left its trace. Her mind raced. The Earl's house was full of secrets and old rivalries, and curses were whispered of in the corners of its stone halls. Alara had never seen such a mark before. Yet something about it felt wrong, dangerous. Still, she had to act quickly. With practiced hands, she tore strips from her scarf and began to carefully bandage the wound, working with both precision and gentleness. You shouldn't be here, the boy murmured, shivering. Father would. He would. Alara interrupted him with a firm shake of her head. No one will find us here, and if they do, I will not let them harm you. Her voice was steady, though inside, her chest tightened with fear. She had disobeyed the Earl once by simply being here, tending to his son, and the risk of punishment weighed heavily on her. Minutes passed like hours as she cleaned and dressed the wound. Alistair's small hand occasionally sought hers, gripping it with a quiet trust that both comforted and unsettled her. She had not expected such a bond to form in the span of a single hour. Yet there it was, a fragile trust, delicate and unspoken. Finally, she stepped back, examining her work. The wound was stabilized, though still tender and raw. The strange mark pulsed faintly under the bandage, a silent reminder that danger still lingered. Alistair's breathing had evened slightly, and a faint color returned to his cheeks. "You did this?" he asked, awe and gratitude mixing in his voice. Ilara gave him a small smile. "Yes, but you must promise me something. You must rest, and not move until your strength returns." He nodded solemnly, the weight of responsibility settling on his small shoulders. "I will try," he said. A sudden noise from the hallway startled them both. Ilara's hands froze in midair, and Alistair's eyes widened in fear. She motioned for him to stay still, listening intently. Footsteps echoed softly, deliberate and measured, almost too light for someone carrying authority, yet heavy enough to strike fear. The Earl appeared in the doorway, his figure framed by the dim light. His face was unreadable, as always, but the dark intensity in his eyes betrayed his surprise. "Ilara," he said quietly, almost a whisper, yet heavy with command. "What are you doing here?" Ilara met his gaze without flinching. "Tending to your son," she replied simply. Her words were calm, but each one carried the weight of truth and defiance. Draven's eyes flickered to Alistair, then back to her. For a moment, silence filled the corridor, the tension so thick it seemed to bend the air. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Earl nodded once. "You should not have been needed," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And yet, you were." Ilara felt a mixture of relief and unease. The Earl's acknowledgement did not erase the danger she had risked, nor did it explain the strange mark that marred Alistair's flesh. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized that this wound was not ordinary. It carried a trace of something unnatural, a shadow she could not yet name. Alistair looked between them, confusion and relief in his eyes. "Father, she helped me," he said softly. "Why? Why did you look angry?" Draven's expression hardened, a mask falling back into place. "Because this house has rules, and rules must be obeyed," he said. His voice was steady, commanding. "Yet, perhaps there are times when the heart must bend before duty." Ilara studied him carefully, noting the faint cracks in his armor of authority. She had glimpsed it, the vulnerability of a father who feared he could not protect his child, the ruler who struggled between justice and fear. She sensed that the coming hours would demand more courage from all of them than they could yet imagine. The clock on the wall chimed ominously, reminding her of the hour she was meant to leave. She had mere minutes to gather her belongings, to obey the Earl's decree. Yet, her hands lingered near Alistair, her heart unwilling to abandon him to the shadow that had marked him. She began, uncertain if the words were wise. "I cannot leave him like this. Not now." Draven's eyes darkened, and for a moment, the strict, unyielding Earl returned. "Then you will remain at your own peril," he said. "I give you the hour to leave. Do not forget it." Ilara nodded, acknowledging both the warning and the unspoken challenge. Her hands moved once more, securing the final bandage. Alistair's eyes met hers, wide with gratitude and fear, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders like a mantle. She could leave and obey the Earl, or stay and risk everything to protect a boy who trusted her. As she stepped back, the shadows in the corridor seemed to pulse, almost as if aware of her choice. The strange mark on Alistair's side glimmered faintly beneath the bandage, a silent promise of danger yet to come. The hour had begun, and Ilara, healer and stranger in the House of Power, would not abandon the child before her. Night had fallen over the Earl's estate, and a cold, silver light from the moon spilled across the stone courtyards. Lady Ilara moved quietly through the shadowed halls, her heart still pounding from the tense encounter with Lord Draven. She had chosen to stay, despite the warning. The thought of leaving Alistair alone in this strange and dangerous place had been impossible. Alistair lay in the small guest chamber that Ilara had managed to secure for him. She had moved quickly to make it a safe haven, stacking blankets, sealing the drafty windows, and placing small candles along the walls. Though the room was modest, it radiated warmth, a fragile bubble against the cold, oppressive manor. "You don't have to hide, my lord," Ilara said softly as she knelt beside the bed. "The wound will heal, but you must rest. No one else can help you if you are weak. Alistair's dark eyes, large and cautious, met hers. He had a wisdom beyond his years, shaped by an upbringing in the strict and lonely corridors of the manor. "I'm not afraid of the pain," he said quietly. "I'm afraid of what comes at night. Of the shadow." Alara's brow furrowed. The boy had mentioned this shadow before, but she had dismissed it at first as a child's imagination. Yet, now she could see the fear in his gaze, the way he flinched at each creak of the house, the way his small hands trembled, even under the warm blankets. "You must tell me everything," she said gently. Alistair hesitated, biting his lip. His voice was barely a whisper. "It started a few nights ago. A darkness that moves on its own. It touches me. It drains me. I tried to hide it from Father. I didn't want him to see how weak I am." Alara's heart ached. This child, so small, so fragile, carried burdens no one should bear. She smoothed his hair back and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not weak. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it," she said softly. "And you are choosing to face it by telling me." As the boy relaxed slightly, the shadows in the room seemed to thicken, curling around the corners as though aware of their presence. Alara could not shake the feeling that the strange mark on his side pulsed in response to the darkness. She rose and lit a candle near the window, its soft glow cutting through the gloom. The shadows recoiled slightly, as though wary of light, but they did not vanish. The silence was broken by a sudden knock at the door. Both Alara and Alistair froze. Who is it?" the boy whispered. Alara held up a finger, signaling him to stay quiet. She opened the door a crack, revealing a small servant boy with pale skin and wide eyes. "Lady Alara." "My lord," he stammered. "I saw someone lurking near the corridors. I think it is the shadow. Please be careful." Alara nodded, suppressing a shiver. "Thank you for telling me. Stay here, and do not leave the room." The servant boy nodded and retreated, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alara closed it quietly and turned to Alistair. "The shadow. It is more than fear. Something unnatural is here. I do not know its origin yet, but I will protect you." Alistair swallowed hard. "But Father, he cannot see it. He cannot know. If he did..." His voice broke, and he looked away, ashamed. Alara knelt beside him again, taking his small hands in hers. "You do not need to bear this alone. Not tonight, not ever. We will face it together." The boy's eyes met hers, filled with trust and a fragile hope. For the first time that evening, Alara allowed herself a small measure of relief. But the feeling was short-lived. A cold wind swept through the manor, rattling the windows and extinguishing a few candles. The shadows in the corners stretched unnaturally, and a low, whispering murmur filled the room, indecipherable, yet threatening. Alistair shivered. "It's here," he whispered. "It is always here." Alara's heart tightened. She had seen darkness before, in her work as a healer, but never so alive, so purposeful. She rose, moving closer to the window. The moonlight revealed the hall beyond, empty yet alive with movement. The shadows twisted along the walls, faint figures glimpsed only out of the corner of her eye. "This is not just a wound to your body," she murmured. "It is a wound to your soul, or perhaps, to your very life. And it is tied to something far older than this house." Alistair's hand found hers, gripping tightly. "What do we do?" Alara took a deep breath. "First, we must understand it. Then, we fight it. I cannot promise that it will be easy or safe, but I can promise you that you will not face it alone." The boy nodded, his small chest rising and falling with a courage that seemed almost beyond his years. "I trust you," he said simply. Meanwhile, in the Earl's private chamber, Lord Draven watched from the shadows. His eyes, dark and unreadable, followed Alara's every move. He had intended to dismiss her and enforce his authority. Yet the sight of her tending to his son stirred something unexpected curiosity, perhaps even admiration. He had always believed that strength and discipline were the only forms of protection. Yet here was Alara, wielding a gentleness and courage that challenged everything he thought he knew. Draven's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden chill in the air. He frowned. Something was not right. The manor, usually predictable in its echoes and drafts, seemed alive, shifting in ways he could not control. The shadows, which normally bowed to his authority, moved against it. Back in Alistair's room, the whispering grew louder. Alara knelt beside the boy once more, her hands hovering above the faintly glowing mark on his side. The shadows recoiled slightly at her touch, yet they did not disappear. She had never faced a force like this before. Her training had prepared her for injuries, illnesses, and even poisons, but never for something that seemed alive, malicious, and tied to a boy's very essence. Alara closed her eyes and focused, drawing on every ounce of knowledge, skill, and intuition she possessed. Her hands moved over the bandaged wound, murmuring soothing words and gentle commands. The boy's breathing steadied, and the whispering dimmed, though it did not vanish entirely. "You are strong," she said quietly. "Stronger than you realize. And together, we can endure this." Alistair looked up at her, eyes wide with awe. "Do you really think we can fight it?" Alara nodded. "I know we can. But we must be careful. The shadow is patient. It waits for fear, for doubt, and it will come again." As the minutes stretched into hours, the boy drifted into a restless sleep, his small body trembling under the blankets. Alara sat beside him, watching over him like a guardian, her mind racing with possibilities. She could feel the darkness lurking beyond the walls, testing her resolve. She knew she could not leave, no matter the risk. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hall. A door slammed somewhere deep in the manor. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. The shadows seemed to pulse in response, spreading like black ink across the edges of the candlelight. She rose, placing a protective hand over Alistair's chest. The whispering grew louder, forming words that she could almost understand, though the language was strange and alien. He belongs. It seemed to hiss. Alistair stirred, murmuring in his sleep, and Alara tightened her grip on his small hand. Her resolve hardened. She would not allow this darkness to claim him, not while she still drew breath. Outside the window, the wind howled, and the moonlight flickered across the manor's towers. Somewhere in the distance, the estate seemed to shift, alive with hidden movements and silent watchers. The hour to leave that the Earl had demanded seemed a trivial concern now, dwarfed by the growing threat. Alara's gaze fell on the boy, pale and shivering but alive, and she made a silent vow. Whatever it took, she would protect him. She would uncover the source of this curse, and she would face the darkness alone if necessary, or with the Earl, should he choose to join her. The candlelight flickered one last time, and a shadow seemed to stretch from the far corner of the room, as though it were testing her courage. Alara's jaw tightened. The night was long, and the danger was far from over. But she would not falter. She would remain, and she would fight. The shadows had grown restless. They shifted like smoke in the cold halls of the manor, curling around corners and stretching toward every source of light. Lady Alara stood beside Alistair's bed, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, listening to the soft, unnatural whispering that filled the room. The boy slept fitfully, his small frame trembling as if he could feel the darkness that had crept closer with each passing hour. Alara's mind raced. The whispers were no longer distant. They had a rhythm, almost a language, as though they were testing her, trying to draw fear from her heart. Her training as a healer had prepared her for sickness and injury, but not for something alive, sentient, and malevolent. Yet she could not leave, not while Alistair's life and soul hung in the balance. A sudden movement in the shadows drew her attention. She tensed, ready to confront whatever came, and saw him, Lord Draven, the Earl, stepping silently into the room. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, alert. "You should not be here," he said quietly. though there was a note of concern beneath his usual command. "The shadows. They respond to this room. And to you." Alara met his gaze without flinching. "I cannot leave him. Not now. He is in danger. And the shadows, they are more than simple darkness. I've seen the mark on his side, and I know it is connected." Draven stepped closer, his presence commanding yet uneasy. "You defy me," he said. "But I cannot ignore what you have done. You saved my son. For that, you have my attention. At least for tonight." Alara studied him carefully. The strict, cold Earl she had known seemed different here, less rigid, more human. Perhaps the danger had shifted something inside him, revealing a side he had hidden from the world. Yet, she knew better than to trust appearances completely. "We do not have time for doubts," she said. "The shadows are growing stronger. They will not wait for permission or caution." Draven's eyes flickered toward the far corner of the room, where the darkness pulsed like living smoke. "Then we must act," he said finally, a rare urgency in his voice. "You, me, we must find the source." Alara nodded. "The boy is not just wounded, he is marked. Something ancient, something that feeds on fear and bloodline, has attached itself to him. If we do not confront it, it will consume him." Alistair stirred in his sleep, moaning softly. Alara knelt beside him, brushing a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "Stay strong, little one," she whispered. "We will face this together." Draven stepped closer to the bed, his hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. The boy stirred again, recognizing the protective presence of his father. "Father," he murmured. Draven's eyes softened for a fleeting moment. "I will not let it harm you," he said quietly, almost to himself. "No shadow, no curse, will take you from me." Alara glanced at him, sensing a tension she had not expected. The Earl, so accustomed to command and authority, now seemed uncertain, vulnerable in a way that few had ever seen. She realized that their partnership, reluctant as it might be, would require trust, courage, and the willingness to confront fears they had both long avoided. The shadows shifted again. And this time, they moved closer. The whispering grew louder, forming fragmented words that Alara could almost recognize. "He belongs. Pain. Fear." She stood, drawing herself tall. "We must lure it into the hall," she said, her voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. "It cannot remain here where it feeds on him. We must confront it directly." Draven's jaw tightened. "You would face it alone?" he asked, suspicion and concern mingling in his voice. "No," Alara said firmly. "With you. Or not at all." He regarded her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we act together." The two moved carefully through the hallways, lanterns casting trembling light on the cold stone walls. The shadows stretched toward them, flickering like black flames. As if aware of their intent, Alara's hand brushed along the walls, seeking protection, while Draven's hand hovered near his sword, a silent promise of defense. As they approached the main hall, the temperature dropped sharply, and a low, hissing whisper filled the air. The shadows converged, forming vague shapes tall, indistinct, yet undeniably alive. Alara's heart pounded, but she held herself firm, recalling every lesson she had learned about courage, about confronting darkness without yielding to fear. The shadows shifted suddenly, revealing a figure tall, cloaked in black, its face hidden, its presence both terrifying and commanding. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She realized that this was the source of the curse, the entity that had haunted Alistair and had followed them here. "You dare confront me?" a voice hissed, echoing through the hall like wind through dead trees. Alara swallowed her fear. "We will protect him," she said, her voice ringing clear and unyielding. "You will not harm this child." The figure moved closer, its form blurring and flickering. Draven stepped forward, drawing his sword, though his hands trembled slightly. "Leave him be," he commanded, "or face the wrath of this house." The shadow laughed, a sound that sent cold tendrils through the air. "Wrath? You, mortal, have nothing to command here. Your son is mine. The bloodline calls, and I obey it." Alara's mind raced. The curse was not only supernatural, it was personal. Tied to the boy. Tied to the lineage of the house. She understood that brute force alone would not defeat it. They would need cunning, courage, and a knowledge beyond swords and strength. She stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of her skill as a healer. Her hands glowed faintly with a soft, silvery light, not from magic, but from the power of intent and will. She whispered words of protection, of binding, of courage. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing in protest, but the figure remained, testing her resolve. Draven watched, fascinated and wary. He had always relied on strength and command, but here was a force he did not understand, yet one that held the power to protect his son. He felt a strange stirring in his chest, a grudging admiration, and perhaps something more, something he had not allowed himself to feel for years. The shadow struck suddenly, rushing toward them with a speed that made the air shiver. Alara stepped in front of Alistair, holding her ground. Draven lunged, swinging his sword, but the figure blurred around his blade, avoiding it as though it were mere air. Alara's voice rang out, steady and commanding. "You will not claim him." She placed her hands over the faintly glowing mark on Alistair's side. Light pulsed outward, not bright but firm, a wave of protection that caused the shadow to falter. The figure hissed and recoiled, retreating into the corners of the hall. It circled them, testing their resolve, but it did not attack directly. Alara realized that they had not defeated it, but they had held their ground. That alone was a victory, fragile though it might be. Alistair stirred, eyes wide. It's afraid?" he whispered. Alara smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "Even the darkest shadow fears courage and love," she said softly. Draven sheathed his sword, though his eyes never left the corners where the shadows lingered. He regarded Alara with a mixture of awe and caution. "You wield power I do not understand," he said quietly, "but you have saved my son. For that, I am in your debt." Alara met his gaze. "Debt is not required, only trust, if you can offer it." A long silence followed, filled only by the soft flicker of lanterns and the distant howl of the wind outside. The shadow had not vanished, it waited, patient and persistent. But for now, Alistair was safe, and that was enough. Draven glanced at the boy, then back at Alara. "We must prepare," he said finally. "Tonight was only a test. The shadow will return, and next time, it will not hesitate." Alara nodded, her jaw set. "Then we will be ready." Together, as the night deepened, they watched over Alistair, who slept, fragile, and unaware of the full danger around him. Alara felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders, but she did not falter. Somewhere in the dark corners of the manor, the shadow whispered, plotting, waiting, but she would face it. And Draven, she realized, would stand with her, whether he admitted it or not. The manor was silent, but the air was thick with tension. Shadows pooled along the walls, curling like black smoke, and the faint whispering that had haunted Alistair for nights now echoed through every corridor. Lady Alara stood beside Lord Draven at the entrance to the main hall. Both of them poised, alert. Alistair was waiting in the small chamber they had prepared, sleeping fitfully, his small body guarded by their watchful eyes. "This is it," Alara said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "We confront it. We end this. It will not harm him again, not if we act together." Draven nodded, gripping the hilt of his sword tightly. "I have always relied on strength," he said. "But tonight, I see that courage alone is not enough. We must combine strength with wisdom, and trust with resolve." Alara met his gaze. There was a vulnerability there he rarely showed, a depth she had never expected. She realized that their partnership had grown from necessity into something stronger, a bond forged in shared courage and peril. And for the first time, Draven seemed aware of it too, though his pride would not allow him to speak it aloud. Together, they stepped into the hall. The shadows shifted, reacting to their presence. The whispering rose, a low, sinister murmur that filled the air. The figure that had haunted them appeared once more, a tall, dark shape, faceless and fluid, its presence both terrifying and commanding. "You dare return?" Alara called, her voice ringing clear in the vast hall. "You have tormented an innocent child long enough. Leave, or face the consequences of your own malice." The shadow seemed to ripple, twisting and pulsing as if amused. "You cannot stop me," it hissed. "He belongs to the darkness. His blood calls, and I obey." Draven stepped forward, his sword gleaming faintly in the lantern light. "You will not touch him," he said. "This house and I will not allow it. Face me if you dare." The shadow moved swiftly, faster than sight could follow, and a chill swept through the hall. Alara raised her hands, murmuring protective words she had learned from old texts and her own intuition. A faint, silvery glow emanated from her palms. Not bright, but firm. A wave of resolve that pushed against the darkness. The shadow recoiled, its form twisting in protest. It surged again, and this time Draven lunged, his sword striking at the moving shape. The blade passed through empty air, the figure blurring and twisting around him. Alara's glow pulsed, sending the darkness back, forcing it to retreat to the corners of the hall. "We must combine our strength," she said urgently. "Not separately. Together. Now." Draven nodded. He moved beside her, positioning himself so that his sword and her light formed a barrier around the hall. The shadow hesitated, testing their resolve. Alara focused on the mark on Alistair's side, the hidden wound that had connected him to this malevolent force. She whispered protective words, not just over the mark, but over the boy's spirit, weaving courage and hope into every syllable. The shadow shrieked a sound that seemed to twist the air and chill the bones. It lunged at them again, but this time, the combined force of Alara's will and Draven's steel met it head-on. The hall seemed to tremble as darkness collided with courage. "You cannot win!" Alara shouted, stepping forward. Her glow flared, stronger now, pushing the shadow backward. "You have no power over the living when they face you together." The shadow twisted violently, its shape fracturing, dissolving into smaller tendrils that writhed and hissed. Draven's sword cut through one. Another dissipated under Alara's light. The battle was not easy. They moved as one, instinct guiding them, trust bridging the gaps between strength and wisdom. Finally, with a final, echoing wail, the shadow collapsed in on itself, dissolving into nothingness. The whispering ceased. The hall was silent once more, save for the soft flutter of candles and the heavy breathing of the two who had faced it. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted, her hands trembling. Draven lowered his sword, his own breathing heavy, and finally allowed himself to look at her fully. "You," he began, his voice thick with emotion he had long buried. "You are more than I could have imagined. Your courage, your skill." Alara looked up, meeting his gaze. For a long moment, silence hung between them. She could feel the weight of their shared trial. The bond formed in danger and fear, and she understood something she had never admitted, even to herself. She did not want this connection to end. "Alistair is safe," she said softly, "and the curse is broken, but the danger is always near. We must be vigilant." Draven nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered on hers. "Vigilance is easier when we face it together," he said quietly. His usual pride softened in the presence of truth, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the armor of authority. They returned to Alistair's chamber. The boy stirred as they entered, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Father, Lady Alara," he murmured. "The shadow. It's gone?" Alara smiled faintly, brushing back his damp hair. "It is gone. For now," she said. "But we must remember courage always, for the darkness waits for those who falter." Draven knelt beside the bed, resting a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "I should have protected you better," he said softly. "But tonight, thanks to Alara, we have faced the darkness together. And we have prevailed." Alistair's small hand reached for Alara's. Alara's heart warmed at the simple gratitude. "You saved yourself too," she said. "Courage comes from within. Alistair, you showed it tonight, and it gave us all strength." The father and son shared a quiet moment, and Alara felt a shift in Draven. He seemed changed, softer yet stronger, more human. The weight of leadership was still upon him, but he had learned that true strength often came from vulnerability and trust. As the first hints of dawn touched the windows, casting pale light over the stone floors, Alara prepared to leave. She had kept her promise to protect Alistair, and the immediate threat had passed. Yet she sensed that the manor and the lives within it would never be the same. Draven stopped her at the doorway, his voice low but firm. "You do not need to leave," he said. "You have proven your courage and your loyalty. I would be grateful if you remained here, at least until we understand all that has transpired." Alara paused, surprised. She had expected dismissal, or at least the cold distance of authority. Instead, there was something genuine in his eyes, a recognition of her strength, and perhaps a hint of respect, even admiration. "I will stay," she said quietly, "for Alistair, and for this house, if it allows me." Draven inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acceptance, though the shadows of doubt and caution still lingered in his gaze. "Then we will face what comes next together," he said. Alara returned to Alistair's bedside, checking the bandages one last time. The boy was finally resting peacefully, his small face relaxed for the first time in days. She whispered a soft prayer of protection, sending courage and warmth into his dreams. The manor was quiet now, the shadows held at bay, yet Alara knew the night had changed everything. The bond between healer and father, between courage and authority, had shifted in ways that could not be undone, and she realized, with a mixture of pride and trepidation, that the darkness they had faced had revealed not only danger but truth, the truth of trust, of resilience, and of the power found in unexpected alliances. Draven stood beside her, watching silently as the first rays of light touched the walls. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel relief, gratitude, and something more, a connection he had long denied himself. He had faced a darkness he could not control, and he had learned that strength was not enough. Sometimes, courage, wisdom, and compassion were stronger than any sword. Alara glanced at him, understanding passing between them without words. The manor would need their vigilance, and the world beyond its walls might yet challenge them again. But for now, the battle was won. Alistair was safe, and the shadows had been held at bay, and in the quiet aftermath, something fragile, but undeniable, began to grow, a bond between healer and lord, forged in courage, tempered by danger, and illuminated by the faint, enduring light of trust.